Welcome to the Master Dad Podcast. I created this podcast to let each and every one of you know that you are not as bad as you think you are. Society wants you to believe that every one of you are racist, bigoted, and just plain evil. I want you to know that you, in fact, are not. With that being said, sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, and let's get to it. I know that the title of this podcast might be a little bit assumptive, but let me start off by saying that all of the amendments to the Constitution are extremely important. Let's first talk about what the First and Second Amendments are. The First Amendment. Most people agree that this is the Free Speech Amendment, but there are other things in this amendment that are just as important. Here is what the First Amendment actually says. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Let's take this piece by piece. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This is simply stating that the United States government will not force its citizens to believe in a government religion. If you want to believe in the flying spaghetti monster, then you are free to do that. Next, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. This is the part that most people take advantage of. Each and every citizen is afforded the right to speak freely and not worry about someone knocking on their door. I see this as the anti-brown shirt portion of the amendment. There is, however, a portion of this section that is consistently overlooked, which I will talk about now. Or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. If you want to do a march, then you can do that, as long as it is peaceful. If you want to do a sit-in, then pop a squat and peacefully petition against that which you do not want. But the moment someone throws something or strikes another individual, that is wrong. The key word here is peacefully. And to petition the government for a redress of grievances. This states that you have the right to make a complaint or seek the assistance of the U.S. government without fear of punishment or reprisal. Okay, now the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. There are a lot of people who interpret this to mean different things, and I'm going to put my 2 cents into the pot as well. I think I have a different outlook that I have yet to see any documentation or video about, but maybe I just haven't seen them yet. Here we go. A well-regulated militia. This one is pretty simple. One definition is this: a military force that is raised from the civil population to supplement a regular army in an emergency. I think that is a pretty good explanation of a militia. Notice that nowhere in this amendment does it have the word only. Being necessary to the security of a free state. Yes, that is what a militia does. It guarantees security for the people, not the country. But there is something weird about this part of the statement. State. That's weird. Why is state capitalized here? Maybe a state indicates a state of being. Maybe it indicates a state of mind. Remember, this was not ratified until 1971. The end of the Revolutionary War was in 1783. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. Notice here that it does not state the right of the people to keep and bear only handguns, or the right of the people to keep and bear knives. This is in reference to any and all arms, also known as weapons. This refers to handguns, rifles, semi-automatic weapons, slingshots, swords, bows and arrows. Heck, even a big stick can be considered as a weapon. And the last and my favorite part, shall not be infringed. Also known as to limit or undermine something, to encroach on. You can also read this as shall not be violated. Now that we have those defined, let's talk about these two together. In order for a dictator to take over a country, he must disarm them first. 1911, Turkey disarmed its citizens, and between 1915 and 1917, they murdered 1.5 million Armenians. 1929, Russia disarmed its citizens, and between 1929 and 1953, they murdered 20 million Russians. In 1935, China disarmed its citizens, and between 1948 and 1952, they murdered 20 million Chinese. 1938, Germany disarmed its citizens, and between 1939 and 1945, they murdered 16 million Jews. In 1956, Cambodia disarmed its citizens, and between 1975 and 1977, they murdered 1 million educated people. In 1964, Guatemala disarmed its citizens, and between 1964 and 1981, they murdered 100,000 Mayan Indians. And lastly, in 1970, Uganda disarmed its citizens, and between 1971 and 1979, they murdered 300,000 Christians. I am sure that before these countries disarmed its people, the population of these countries were able to actively redress their governments when they saw the government doing something wrong. I ask anyone to go to one of these countries today and protest the government. Here's why that is not a good idea. In Russia, because of laws recently put in place by Vladimir Putin, protesting can get you a very hefty fine and jail time. Not so in the US. Protesters in China have had a wide variety of grievances, including corruption, forced evictions, unpaid wages, human rights abuses, environmental degradation, ethnic protest, petitioning for religious freedom and civil liberties, protest against one-party rule, as well as nationalist protest against foreign countries. For example, in the early morning of June 4th of 1989, the People's Liberation Army was mobilized to disperse the crowds by using weapons to open fire on the crowd, killing several hundred to thousands of Chinese citizens. Generally, private citizens are not allowed to possess firearms. This does not happen in the US. In Germany, the 1938 regulations against Jews' possession of weapons, which came into force the day after Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night, also known as the Night of Broken Glass, effectively deprived all Jews living under the Third Reich within the occupied Sudetenland and Austria of the right to possess any form of weapons, including truncheons, knives, firearms, and ammunition. Exceptions were made for Jewish and the Polish who were foreign nationals. Before that, some police forces used the pre-existing trustworthiness clause to disarm Jews on the basis that the Jewish population cannot be regarded as trustworthy. The list goes on and on. It comes down to this. If a leader of a country wants to become a dictator, he must rid the population of the ability to stand up for what is right. One tactic that I've used on several occasions brings to light a point that almost everyone misses. A gun is a tool. That is all it is. I had a friend that was deathly afraid of guns. I asked him if I could prove a point, and I wanted to show him something. I pulled out my pistol and laid it on the table in front of us. I asked him to yell at the pistol. He gave me a weird look, at which I smiled and asked him to trust me. After a little trepidation, he meekly raised his voice. I told him thank you and asked him to do it again. He did. I told him to call it a name, and as you might expect, nothing happened. I asked him to threaten the gun, and at that he chuckled, but did anyway. And once again, nothing. I asked him why I did that, and he honestly told me that he has no idea why I had him do that. It was to prove a point. A gun is a tool and will not do anything without someone behind the trigger. You could almost see the light bulb going off in his head. Gun deaths in the United States for 2018 did not even crack the top 10 causes of death in the United States. You could argue that suicides, which was number 10, did account for a lot, and while yes, half of all suicides were done with a weapon, the other half were done by suffocation and poisoning. You could very well argue that ropes and pills should be banned using this logic. The majority of people look to the tool rather than the reason. We need to look at the reason guns are used in such a bad manner and not the tools themselves. By the way, you will never see a supporter of the Second Amendment stand against the First Amendment because we fundamentally know that this is a right, just like the Second Amendment. Thank you for listening to the Master Dad Podcast. If you are a fan of this podcast, please feel free to give me a big thumbs up and subscribe. Also, please feel free to leave a comment. And remember, don't take life too seriously. You'll never make it out alive.